And welcome back to MR Realities, a little podcast that my good friend Kevin Gray and I, Dave McCaughan, put together where we talk to people that are involved in the market research industry from around the world on the latest topics, on the trends and what they think is going to be happening in the near future. Today, we're very lucky to have Lucy Davison joining us, and we're going to be talking about a subject close to my heart, communicating insights. And I think that's going to be a very interesting one and probably a lot of debating going on. Kevin, how are you?
Yeah, hi, I'm doing okay. It's pretty lousy weather outside, but I'm inside, so that doesn't matter. Anyway, Lucy, thank you so much for joining us. I'm looking forward to this because our topic here is, it's something that applies to anybody. I mean, you can be a nuclear physicist and it matters, communicating insights and even the sort of, things we do, of course, it's just as important, if not more so. So anyway, but just to start off, could you just give us a quick background about yourself, who you are, what you do, where you came from, whatever you feel.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Sure. Thank you very much, Kevin. And it's absolutely lovely to be here and to hear your voice after really quite some long time.
Yeah, we won't say how long.
We won't say how long. No, exactly. So I started out, my initial degree was in English literature. And so I'm a writer, really. And then I did another degree in landscape architecture. So I kind of have a design thing going on there as well, which is kind of, I suspect, what led my rather sort of strange career path. But yes, I worked in journalism and also in design before I joined the insights industry, which was in 2000. So it's a neat number, which I can remember. And I joined Research International, and I worked as Research International's marketing director. And that was on a global level for about 7 years, which I really, really enjoyed. And when I left, I decided to set up my own business because I struggled to find agencies that really understood insights. So I've been running Keen as Mustard, which is a pretty unusual type of company because we really only focus on marketing for data and insights and technology in that space. And we've been doing that for 12 years. And I have a small team of people in London, and we do a lot of work in the US and also globally. So that's kind of a quick sort of skip through my last, I don't know how many years.
Well, I remember we're former, for the benefit of the audience, we worked together for maybe 4 years, I think, at Research International. So. And I remember, yeah. And our presentation materials, all our communications at that time were prepared, by people like me, frankly. And I guess they were okay for the time, but they didn't. I don't think they focused too much on methodology and the technical details, as you would expect marketing science people to do, and overlooked the visual appeal and the things you need to communicate insights anyway. So, but that's going on nearly 20 years now. And to follow up on our brief discussion before we got started online, how have things changed since you, in terms of communicating insights, over that space of time?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that if you go to, conferences, if you go to ESOMAR Congress or, any of the big global or leading congresses, you get fabulous presentations which have been beautifully designed and, are absolutely stunning and are very well presented, and storytelling is very evident. And, in some presentations with clients, that is also the case. And I'm talking about a wide range of reports and presentations and the kind of things that agencies or, companies are producing for clients in terms of communicating the insights that they found. However, I was just saying to a colleague yesterday, I feel a little bit like Groundhog Day, because honestly, the number of times I open a presentation or a report and it is chart after chart. I mean, there was 120 slides in the one I had to look at yesterday, and I just cannot believe that people are not able to provide some kind of editorial rigor to just ensure that they have an appendix. And it's just lazy. And I know it's because people don't have time. And I know it's because they say, oh, it's, I haven't got time to, write something shorter. I think it was Pascal who said that. But, the fact is that there are very simple, straightforward ways where you can actually create much better, more impactful quality materials without spending hours and hours and hours charting every single one of those 120 slides. So that's my kind of passion, if you like.
I think, in some ways, the technology that we have, if you call PowerPoint technology, I mean, I guess it was at one time and still is, and is widely used. But in a way, it may have gotten in the way because you can make charts very quickly, often automated, and sort of it's easy to fix mistakes after they're done. Now,
yes.
When I got started, we didn't have that, and mistakes were very costly, and we had to be thinking about the presentation when we were writing the proposal or the RFP. Even I started on the client side, and we were thinking of those things, and thinking specifically what were the key things that we wanted to show. We did graphics were much more expensive and slower and harder to produce in those days, but I think in some ways the technology has retarded our progress, at least for some.
I agree. I mean, you can push a button and you can auto chart a load of things, and that doesn't mean that the things you're auto charting are actually right. And I'm very much of the opinion that the design and the story should be planned and part of the design of the actual study. So you actually create your hypotheses and your structure right at the start. And then what you're doing is you're dropping in the data to illustrate the flow of your story. Now, you obviously might need to change and adjust that, and that's important, depending on what you find. However, to make a really decent presentation, you need to be able to, structure it and get the idea of what it is you're trying to get across before you even started planning anything.
I've had, colleagues who insisted on, a maximum of, 20 slides, including the cover and the thank you at the end. And then everything else was either on a computer, the nice to know numbers or quotes or whatever, or, in an appendix.
Absolutely.
And just get right to it. I was going to say something else, but I'm talking too much, so I imagine Dave has. Dave knows tons more about presenting. Dave knows how to give a good presentation. I know how to give a bad presentation.
Yeah, so it's interesting what you say, Kevin. I think first of all, my own belief and background was before I got into marketing, advertising, market research, I spent 10 years as a children's storyteller in public libraries. And so I'm always of a mindset that, when I first started doing that, somebody much older, wiser, much better at that than I am, explained to me, look, if you could sit down with five-year-olds and you can hold their attention for 10 minutes, then you're telling a great story. And I think that's part of the problem is we get so wrapped up in the data or the examples and PowerPoint. And, I know we always say this, but for some reason, our industry seems to think that if you don't have charts, you can't tell a story. And I'm also then reminded of when I first did a TEDx talk, and the guy who invited me to do that was actually the guy that negotiated the first TEDx programs around the world. And he explained to me, look, when it comes to TED, charts are peripheral. And the best thing to do is to be able to stand there for 10 minutes, tell your story without a chart. If you can do that, then you've got a great story. The chart should just be, and we always say this, but the trouble is, I think, Lucy, as you were saying, people get so focused on the mechanisms of the chart building that they forget what the story is.
Well, I think there's several things. I think there's several things going on. The first thing is that a lot of people can't tell what's happening without having it on a chart. Yeah. So it's the ability to read data and understand it from, a chart could be, a bar chart or a pie chart, or let's not say pie chart, but, a few other things. Mm-hmm. But fundamentally, the ability to be comfortable with reading data and seeing what is going on without it having to be in PowerPoint is one thing. Right. The other thing is the fact that people people conflate presentations with reports. Now, the deliverable after a project for a client, you know, the problem is that because of the extreme pressure that everyone's under in terms of time and cost, people conflate a deliverable, they conflate a presentation, which if they get the opportunity to present something or do a workshop or what have you, that's one thing, and they conflate that with a report, which is actually fundamentally something that people are going to read. And they do the same thing. And the problem is PowerPoint is designed for presentations. It's not designed for reports. And you can use it for written reports, but it encourages you to insert charts in slides in the way that it's designed and put together. So therefore you do that in your report, and you don't think about the story, you think about the individual charts, and you get hung up on the data. And that's kind of like, it's not the fault of PowerPoint, but it's just being misused. I mean, PowerPoint actually, you know, is a kind of graphics software, if you like. It's certainly, you know, it's certainly the graphics software that that is most commonly used in Insights, and it's, you know, extremely limiting, and, you know, it's not really, you know, none of the people who are using it don't really know how to use it. They're not designers, and so I think it's a kind of, it's not the fault of the PowerPoint, but at the same time, you know, it's people using it not thinking about before they start what the purpose of the piece, that the communication they're going to use is, and how they're going to communicate it. And so what we do is always try to work out and before, you know, as Kevin was saying earlier, you know, plan the story, work out what the data is that we need, understand what an appendix is, and structure it around that, and then use a creative brief to think about the communication of your story. So actually, in the way that you would a campaign for, you know, an advertising campaign or a PR campaign, think about the audience, think about what you want them to think or do as a result of seeing the communication. Think about how much time you've got. Think about other ways you can get your message across. Think about, you know, all these things, because that's all part of the communication, and treat it like a campaign. And if you do that, then you've got a much better chance of ensuring that, you know, what you've done is actually going to be engaging. And I've done a lot of work around this area. You know, we've seen it work.
My other pet peeve is when it goes to the other extreme where people are trying to be artists. And they come up with, you know, it's just basically, it may not be a massive presentation in terms of the number of charts, but it's really these collages and all these, you know, things, allegories and pictures of Beethoven and all that, these sorts of things, which look beautiful, but they don't connect very well with the story. They're just kind of like the person who put them together wants to be creative. And I find, at least for myself, when I'm in the audience looking at these or watching this sort of presentation on YouTube, that I'm captivated by the charts, trying to figure out what they're talking about, and I miss the audio part of it. I don't listen to what the speaker is saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly the case that, you know, images certainly engage us much more easily and more directly than what people say, and that's a really interesting point. If you're a presenter, and I would always say, yes, you need to be able to do it on your own, standing without any support material in 10 minutes. And then, you know, if you've got the engagement level of a group of 5-year-olds, and let's just face it, most audiences are a group of 5-year-olds, even if there's a 45 or 55, you know, that's absolutely what you need to think about. And if you can do that, then you know, then you're sorted. But the fact is that for the vast majority of researchers aren't going to be doing that. They are going to be emailing a PowerPoint attachment, which is a report. You know, I agree, distracting graphics of any kind are not good. And if they're not supporting the story, or if they're not connected with the story, or, you know, if you've got multiple complex metaphors going on in there, then yes, all you're doing is confusing people. But the fact is that the vast majority of researchers faced with this problem are having to send a report. And that is one of the key issues that we have, partly because we're not really ensuring the level of engagement with the potential audience and the stakeholders that you really need to have in order to do good communications, but also that you don't get that face time, you don't get that ability to actually communicate directly and present great images or terrible images. You just, that does not occur. So it's getting around that problem and making sure that people, using email is fundamentally the way most people have to communicate. How is that working, and how are we ensuring that we have impact? And that is a really difficult problem.
I wonder how often the cause of the problem is not having a story in the first place. They just don't know they don't know how to interpret the results of the research. So it may not be a communication problem so much as they don't have a story.
Excuse me.
Or they can't find it.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. No, it's not a question of finding. I think it's a question of building. Yeah. So it's not like it's like, when people talk about insights, it's like they go out and pick up a rock and, oh, look, there's an insight. That's not how it works. You have to really think about these things. You have to be able to really, take multiple sources. You have to contextualize. You have to think about, at the very least, you have to triangulate. You have to have at least 3 different points in order to be able to kind of actually pull it together and work out what's really going on. Now, you're the researchers, so, I'm presumably, preaching to the choir here, but the fact is that so many people do have, a very linear approach to the way this is done, and they're not really thinking about things in a broader context. I mean, I've seen so many reports where people have no idea what the purpose of the research is. Yeah. So they've done a study, and it could be massive or it could be tiny, but they've done it, and they've never actually asked their client or their client's client why. And, getting to that fundamental why is absolutely essential, because if you're going to create a story, you need to be talking to that big why. And then you'll have a story, then you'll be able to think about, okay, what is this company doing? What's happening there? Where is it going? Why is it important that they understand, how seniors are behaving, and, what's happening with the health drink market for over 65s. Otherwise, they've just done a load of research into the health drinks market for the over 65s, and they haven't connected it up with anything.
Yeah, that means the research probably is not very good to begin with, because it hasn't been designed to match the objectives of the decision makers. Exactly.
But people don't ask those questions, or they think that they're quite often the client, the direct client, is a researcher who is trying, in the same way as a lot of people at agencies are, eager to please their stakeholders, eager and keen to, put in all the extra baggage that might not be a good idea in the study, loses sight of what the real purpose is. Or sometimes that researcher, the person in the client who's commissioned the research, actually hasn't explored the why and hasn't gone back to their internal stakeholder and said, actually, we don't even need to do a study. We can use the data we got from that thing last year, and then we can look at some stuff on social media, and we can integrate that with, some reports from, Mintel or whoever, and actually, I can build you something really interesting. And, if we hypothesize that this is the problem and this is the purpose for this thing, then, I just feel like there's a lot of research done which is probably not needed, and half the time you would be able to know that if you were thinking about the story from the beginning.
Yeah, I think this is one of the my big bugbears is that the need to prove that, we just found something new because we've done something different, or we've done some new research. And too often, as you say, we're not actually developing content and stories. Content and stories are okay, but the reason for being there is the most important thing. And I think unless you're answering a real need, then too often, and Lord knows how many times we've all sat through endless presentations. In fact, the other day I was explaining, when I lived in Japan, I had a client. He's become a good friend of mine. He's a great client, but very, very tough. And for some strange reason, even though I was working for one of his ad agencies, he would always insist that I sit through the regular meetings he had from one of the big research houses. But the real reason I was sitting there was because he would literally go off his head every time about, why are you doing all of this? All I wanted was an answer to X. And the reason I was sitting there was because I was the guy that had to sort of placate everybody afterwards by saying, look, maybe if we refashioned it this way and because his thing was, look, I wanted to know what was the reason why a particular region of Japan was buying less toothpaste. Why do I have to sit through an hour of presentation on that, and 55 charts? Why can't you just come in here and tell me over the tape? It really brought home what you're talking about, Lucy, which is that too often people in our industry get so stuck up in process, and therefore the way you present things, the way you tell things is a process, as opposed to just sit across a table from a guy and just tell him what you think.
Exactly.
And then, you can produce a document afterwards to prove it, and and if he needs numbers and stuff, go away and find that. But just tell them the story. Why is this really happening?
Yes, exactly. And I think it's losing sight of that, and losing sight of the purpose, and not focusing on that, which does cause a lot of problems. But having said that, I mean, I'm doing a lot of work with clients at the moment, and I mean, and with large in different insights teams, and it's people do fall in love with their data, and they get really upset when you say, you don't need that slide, you don't need that chart, that's gone, you don't need, I've had people say, but you're killing my babies, because they've they've gone to such effort and energy to get this data, and they just can't bear to part with it.
Right.
But if you really push them, I mean, to be honest, the way that we do it is we simply sit down with people and we interview them, and it's only a 20-minute job. They might have 120 slides, but we say to them, okay, so what was the purpose? What were you trying to get to here? And then we write stories around that, and we'll be talking about newsletter stories which are like 50 words and a great headline. And we've done a lot of research into what makes headlines that people will click on. And we've gone from people, with some of our clients, emailing 120 slides in a report, attaching it to an emailing it to a random group of people they don't even know who they are half the time, with a subject line that says Q3 tracker FR/GR/IT, just not even full names for countries, and with some incredibly interminably boring saying the results of the tracker are here, and that's it. And this is the problem that we're dealing with, and that most people are emailing this content around. They're attaching it to an email. They're not giving any consideration to the overall communication of the whole project. And you have to step back from it and think about how to write that subject line, and how to, treat it like a hook, behave like a journalist. What do you want people to know? How are you going to get them into it? And are you going to be able to get them to open that attachment? Or, joy of joys, if you actually have an intranet or some form of, repository, is there a way that you can put the stuff on there and get people to go to that and actually open it and read it and look at it and engage with it? Right. And that is the challenge. That is the challenge. I feel like that is the challenge more almost than the actual putting the presentation/report together. I think that's difficult enough, but actually getting people to even look at this stuff, they really don't care, and people completely forget their internal stakeholders really, really do not give a, and they really don't care, and they're not going to do it. So it's how to get people engaged with that.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, this again goes down to what you're saying about structure, and structuring the way you're going to tell somebody something is often just as important as what you're going to tell them. But it's the thinking through of what it is that you want to get across, and how you're going to get it across in a meaningful way. That sometimes it's about timing, sometimes it's about impact. So of course, as you said, you've got to figure out what the audience really wants and how you're going to explain this. But doing the homework about that is just as important as maybe doing the actual research sometimes.
Yeah, you may remember the TV detective series Columbo. That's pretty hard to forget, at least if you're of a certain vintage. That was interesting and unique in that basically it began with the ending. So right away, right from the beginning, you knew who did the murder. You knew who the guilty person was.
Yeah.
And then Colombo, in his particular way, his eccentric way, had to uncover the means and motive, and of course who did it. So I've experimented with this a few times. I call it the Colombo style because of that. It follows that sequence where I actually begin with the key results right up front. You know, I introduce maybe with one slide what the research is about, you know, without getting into the details, the methodology, get to that later. So here's my recommendations. Okay, here are the key findings and my recommendations, and then move back into the why I think that and the method if we have time to get to it. I found that when I've been able to pull that off, it's not always easy because you're not used to doing, at least I'm not used to doing it that way. It has worked well.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I've got some training, and I use the comparison of Colombo and Poirot. Poirot with the sort of carefully stitched together argument with all the different people being interviewed in the library, and you know, and right at the end you get the reveal. Now, the fact is that is that's not, we don't have the indulgence of the time for that very often. And thinking about the different levels of people who are engaged or want to know about this stuff, you know, I think you need to have something right up front, Colombo style, which is, you know, here's what you should do, and you know, here's why. And really that's what people want. I mean, to your guy who said, you know, why are people in a certain region of Japan not buying this toothpaste and had to sit through, you know, a massive long presentation. You really don't. That's not the point. Yes, you can write a report and you can provide some data for people to look at in a more leisurely, granular way. But if you haven't started, I think, you know, open the door and started with your pitch, you have to sell it. Then I think that you've lost people. And I think that, I mean, when I do communicating insights training, we do very much try and get people to think about structuring something which is starting with the recommendations, you know, supporting that with the key findings, and then you know, anything else that gets included has to earn its place in that story. And I always use the analogy of Michelangelo with the large rock. And if you like, the large rock is your data, and the man comes in and says, what is that? And Michelangelo says it's a lion, and the man says, well, it's not, it's a large rock. And Michelangelo says, you know, what are you going to do? And Michelangelo says, I'm going to knock off all the pieces that don't look like a lion. And it's precisely that. It's basically take it out, and it's just, you know, just having that editorial integrity. If you've got your lion at the front, you know what it is you're trying to do, then you just don't include the stuff that doesn't look like a lion. Now, I know that sounds like a glib and easy way of describing it, but it actually means that you've got that golden thread, and it means that you've got that strong storyline, and it means that you've got that structure, and that, I think, is absolutely key. And it does require bravery, and it requires a consultancy mindset. And I think this is one of the problems, is that researchers, as I said before, they're often a little bit isolated, or quite often they have a supplier mindset. So they're not consulting with their internal teams, and they're not consulting, you know, with other people in the organization. I mean, we've done studies with clients when we've started to do communications projects with them, and they just don't even know who they're communicating to, or they don't even know if they can speak to these people. They don't know what their jobs are. They don't know what their names and job titles are. And you can't, you know, as with any communications project, you can't communicate with an audience until you know what your audience is. And you know, here we are sitting working in research, and the number of times researchers, you know, have no idea who they're communicating with, and also won't even do the research. So it's very refreshing when we've had clients recently who've said, oh, you know what, we need to go and find this out. And then they've kind of actually spent a couple of months doing the research internally and finding out who they're communicating with, and what, you know, what they might do with the insights, and what they might, you know, how they might package them differently for them. And so the work we're doing now is very much focused around looking at internal audiences, segmenting internal audiences, and creating materials that are relevant and appropriate for different teams, so that you can get real engagement. And 90% of that is actually trying to get people to look at stories in presentations and on, company intranets or, data lakes or portals or platforms or what have you. And obviously the tech has, made a huge difference, but you can, most organizations have invested vast sums of money in the ability to store and manage their reports and their data, but they're just getting people to the edge of the lake, and then people are like, nah, I don't want to go swimming, and then they're not actually engaging with it. And huge amounts of money are spent. Just having a lake doesn't mean you've got a swim team. And putting those two things together is, I'm sorry, I'm probably stretching this analogy rather.
No, I love it.
Excuse me, I'm probably over egging the analogy. But yes, but to people are investing huge sums of money. They're doing amazing things, but they're still not actually getting people's engagement and actually getting them into that data or into those reports, or actually, because they don't know the audience, they don't understand the audience, they don't know what they want, they don't know what their jobs are. And it's not just the C-suite, because it actually really bugs me that in insights we get so hung up on, we need a table, seat at the top table, we need to be engaging with the board, blah blah blah. Well, yeah, of course we do, but that's not that's not the point. If you've got a head of insights who isn't engaging with the board, you've got the wrong head of insights. You need somebody who has a really good way of communicating in a compelling and dynamic way, who can really help the board make good decisions and provide them with the support to do that. And that's the purpose of that person. If that person isn't doing that, get another person. And it's not about that. It's not about changing the language and not using the words market research or using different kind of things to describe what we do. That's not going to help. It's about the people who are actually doing that engagement, and they should be doing that themselves. The people we need to really influence is all those people within organizations who don't even know that insights exist, who don't actually realize that they could be making better decisions. They could be taking huge advantage of knowledge of broader trends or understanding of how the consumer's behaving, or being able to predict in any way, shape or form where the markets are going. And the fact is that the vast majority of people who work in companies don't really know about any of this stuff. And that's our communications problem. Our communication problem isn't with the C-suite. Our communication problem is with the 95% of people who work in companies who don't really understand or know anything about insights. And I think that is the audience we should be reaching out to. Those are the people, they can say, my God, I had no idea this is nearly always. They think it's fantastic what we're doing. But
I ran into that recently where someone presented to a digital marketing team and basically gave them an orientation to quote unquote traditional marketing research, and they were very receptive. They had no idea what and they didn't realize they'd be going out there buying these digital segments, but not thinking about how some background research would help in that selection.
Yeah, or you could go about doing it, a long time ago, before everybody had computers. We used to develop these things we call placemats, which were just like those placemat things you get on dining tables. But they were weekly things where it was like, it wasn't really an insight necessarily. Here's the interesting thing we found out in the last week that might be of interest to you. And we used to put these on everybody in the company's desks. Years later, another client hired us, and what we ended up doing was he wanted to do exactly what you're talking about, Lucy, which was to get everybody. I think he had like 1,000 employees, and he wanted everybody to sort of understand some of the interesting things we were finding about the marketplace, about the people that were buying their products, etc. So what they used to do was when you plugged in your computer on a Monday morning, when you got to work, you used to, instead of putting in your password or whatever, there was literally like a quick quiz, which was like, hey, which of these three things do you think our customer really believes? And you would have to click on it, take a guess, and then a thing little pop up with literally a simple paragraph telling why that was true or how they'd found that out. And what we found was that people of all sorts of people, like, people that were in the packers in the factory, all this sort of stuff, were actually it became a competition for them, and it's something of interest to them to actually see this stuff. And they ended up putting it in terms of it became like a competition thing. You could gather points over the weeks by getting the question right, etc., so that people would get rewarded for this. But the point was the whole company raised up an interest in insights or in information about, that was coming out of market research and stuff. So just simple ways of telling stories and getting across to a broader audience.
Exactly. I mean, this is to what you said. There were two things that struck me there. One of them was there was a study done a couple of years ago which looked at 70,000 news headlines from global news agencies around the world, and they distilled down 5 different ways of writing a news headline which would get people's attention.
Yeah.
And the work that I did with Coca-Cola last year, we used that to test and write different headlines for internal stakeholders at Coca-Cola to try and get engagement, see which ones they clicked on most, and which led them to actually open attachments or go to the knowledge sharing platform. And a quiz was one of those ways. But actually the way that as in, asking a question, because people always love to think that they know the answer to that question, and there's a really good way of just getting quick engagement with people. But the one that actually won in terms of our testing, in terms of the number of clicks, was using numbers in headlines. So it's that old clickbait, 3 ways to leave your husband, or and so 3 things you need to know, or 10 ways to improve your brand, or 5 things millennials always do, or stuff like that. That encourages people to think about clicking on the content. So I love your idea of doing like a quiz, because that always works really, really well. But the other thing is just
I used to find a lot of things about doing presentations, and like you said, I go to the big, the ESOMARs and the IX and the Green Book, all these big conferences around the world and stuff. And I do wacky presentations, where I do stupid things on stage to gather attention, so that then people start listening to me. But it's more about the little things. And I think that's the interesting thing about what you raised, was it's more about getting to the little things that maybe are affecting more people within an organization and getting a broader change happening in an organization. And I'm just reminded of a story I heard once of an agency that was working with UPS, and to get their people to really understand how they were trying to change something, what they actually did was they actually did a little session for all of the drivers, the delivery guys, in the brown uniforms and stuff like that. And it was actually, they trained them on how to basically tell their customers 2 things, just 2, literally, research points about UPS's, what they'd found out about why people like UPS. And it was done in the form of, hey, I've just heard from my boss that apparently we're really good at this. What do you think? And the idea was that they would then repeat that back to all their along their routes every day, and then back in what they heard.
Dave, you seem to be cutting out.
They heard that.
Yeah, Dave, I can't hear you.
Made them feel a much more bigger part of you.
Gone.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to turn it over to Dave, because we're running short on time. Dave, should I try to ask your question, since we've lost you? Yeah, Dave.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Dave likes to and well, first, do you have anything else you'd like to mention before we wrap up, Lucy?
Oh gosh, I mean, I how long is a piece of string? I could keep talking about this forever. So no, I mean, if you've got any more questions, that's absolutely fine, because I could just talk for England. on this subject.
Oh dear. Wow. Yeah. Well, I know what you mean, though. I mean, it's something that people can disagree on, but we hear, presentations and see presentations on how to give presentations, and some of them are very good, uh, and or how to do, write reports. Some are very good. On the other hand, I notice that some, tend to focus on things like, your mannerisms, don't fold your arms, and these sort of little things, and don't use, this sort of chart, use this sort of chart and all that. And it kind of, well, that may be, useful information, but it can be distracting. But anyway, since I think Dave is inaudible.
Yeah, I can't hear him at all.
Yeah.
I can't hear him at all now.
He normally likes to end the show with sort of his big question. And if I can, I've heard it 35 times, and I'll see if I can remember it. But what is it? What is the one question that you have never asked?
Okay. Yeah.
That you wish you had asked? The one question you haven't asked, but you wish you had.
Oh my word, that's a really difficult question. I mean, there's one thing that I know people should stop doing, but it's not a question. Can I go with that?
Sure. Yeah. Why are you doing what you're doing?
in terms of communicating insights, if there's one thing that I have learned, and there's one thing that I want people to remember, it is to stop emailing PowerPoint presentations.
That is good. That is really good. We've gotten into that habit. I remember originally we sort of, at least the companies that I work for, resisted that because clients could interfere. They would want to change things, and PDF files were harder to create and so forth and all that. But yeah, that's an excellent point. And you lose control over the presentation when you do that.
Yeah, well, you lose control of the presentation, but nobody will open it. Nobody's going to look at it.
Yeah.
And you feel like, and researchers just send it out on an email. They put a stupid subject line. They don't put any interesting text around it. And if you actually, that is how you're communicating, you've got a real problem. And so the data we have, we've done actual research that supports the fact that if you do that, you will have zero impact.
Wow.
And there are much, much better ways of creating engagement and impact with your internal audiences, which do not involve PowerPoint at all, and certainly don't involve emailing PowerPoint. PowerPoint is a presentation medium. It's not a written, a newsletter, an infographic, a video, all those things. Yeah, sure, you can engage with people using those, and you can send them in an email, and that's absolutely fine. But a PowerPoint presentation, you can forget it. I don't know if there's a question I wish I'd asked. I'm sure there are many, but I can't think off the top of my head of a big overriding question. Maybe I'm not.
Dave chose that question because it's a hard one. I think he enjoys watching or listening to people who struggle with that, because it's one of those things that it's a tough one. But anyway, this has been despite our slight technical difficulties. This has been fantastic, and I've been in this business for more than 30 years, and I'm still learning, and I learned a lot here in the last 40 minutes. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming, especially very early in the morning your time.
Oh, it's nothing. It's 8 o'clock. It's not too bad at all. No, it's fine.
Okay, thank you so much then.
Okay, all right then. Well, take care. Okay.
Bye.
All right then. Bye.